Okay, welcome everyone. We are about to get started with our presentation today made by our principal researcher, Dr. Colm Howlin, on how students behave in personalized adaptive courses. We have some very fascinating initial results from some observations in courses at UCF, one of our partners. Just a couple of notes before we get started. We will be holding all questions until the end of our presentation. The presentation will last about 30 minutes today, and we will allow plenty of time for Q&A. If you've dialed in, all of your lines are on mute, so please do use either the chat feature or the Q&A feature on the right-hand side of your screen to submit your questions. We will try to get them all answered, but any of them that we don't get to, we'll certainly reach out to you and make sure that you have all the information that you need. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Colm Howlin to start the presentation.
Thank you very much, Leah. And first of all, hello to everybody, and thank you for taking the time to attend today's webinar. And this is the first in what we hope will be a series of these kind of webinars. We've titled them Research Insights. Our goal is to share both the internal research that we're involved in and some of the collaborative research projects we're involved in with our partner institutions. We want to share with you, or give a bit more insight into what it is we do behind the scenes, how the system works, why it works the way it does, and where we're going with it, the kind of stuff we want to do in the future and the stuff we want to build into the system in the future. So today's talk is about just want to share with you some of the observations we have from some initial research into how students behave in personalized adaptive courses. And we're going to be looking at examples from real students in real courses in UCF. They've very generously allowed us to share what we found with you today. And this is work I've been doing with Chuck and Patsy at UCF, and I've gotten some input as well from you and Lindsay in CSU in Australia. So instruction, a large part of instruction and in adaptive learning is providing feedback and guidance to students in order to influence their behaviors. And we want them to engage in the kind of behaviors that will lead to positive outcomes. In adaptive learning, we have kind of a new situation, and we can expect in that situation for new behaviors to emerge, for things that weren't possible before to now be possible for students, and to engage in behaviors that we hadn't seen before in a face-to-face or in other online settings. We need to be able to understand what these behaviors tell us about the students, and we need to be able to understand whether they are positive or negative behaviors, or whether there's any relationship between the kind of behaviors we can observe and student outcomes or not. And before we can, really give effective guidance to students on which behaviors to engage in and which ones they should be moving away from. So today's talk is broken into 3 sections. The first looks at, we're just going to have a quick chat about adaptive learning and our view on it and my view on it. That's only going to take a couple of minutes. And then we get to the really interesting bits, which are the examples from the UCF courses. We've got 3 examples to look at today, and like I said, they're real students. And then we'll wrap up with looking at what some of the potential impact of this research, where we want it to go, and how it can potentially have some impact in the system and the way we go about doing things. So what is adaptive learning? These are 2 definitions for adaptive learning that I found online. One is from Wikipedia, and the second one is from Titan Partners. Now, I don't expect you to read all of that on the screen. I'm actually going to summarize it for you, because they both kind of say the same thing, and you'll find that many definitions out there say the same thing. They basically say that computers use data to select and adapt the presentation of content and resources to meet a learner's needs. Now, I don't like these kind of definitions for a number of reasons. The main one being that they focus very much on the mechanical side of what adaptive learning is. They focus on what the computer is doing, they focus on the data, and they focus on the algorithms. What I think they're missing is what adaptive learning actually enables. What does it allow students and instructors and institutions to do now that they couldn't do before? They focus too much on the learner being they still play the learner as being a passive player in the adaptive learning experience. The computer does stuff and serves learning up to the learner, whereas I think adaptive learning can take students beyond that and take learning beyond that. A point to note, I think, as well, is that this is not new. Chuck from UCF likes to say this. This is not new. The only new bit here is computers using data to do it. The adapting and selecting content to suit the needs of a learner is something good instructors have always been doing and always will do. The only new part is computers doing it. So from these kind of definitions, what are we missing? Well, I think the first thing that's missing is time. Any discussion around what it enables to do, or what it allows the student to do with regard to time. It first allows them to break away from the classroom schedule. They can learn when it suits them as opposed to trying to fit themselves into a schedule. This is particularly important for adult learners or people returning to education. They can learn when in the evening after work, or they can put in extra time if they need to. They can learn at the pace that they need. If some students are slow learners and move at a slower pace and require extra sessions, then adaptive learning can enable that. Or if a student is very good, finds the material quite easy and wants to move on ahead, adaptive learning can enable that too. It can also enable students to work where they want and using the device that they want, so they can learn in the manner that they want, whether that's at home on their own, working by themselves, or in a group at the local coffee shop. Adaptive learning can enable both of these kind of styles. What we're really saying is that adaptive learning, and what's really missing from the definitions, is that adaptive learning can put the student in control of their own learning. They can learn at the time that suits them and in the place and use the device that suits them. But you're doing so in a supported environment. They're supported by the system through the feedback and guidance it provides them, it gives them, and they're supported by the instructor, who is in turn supported by the information that the system is providing to them on how the student is progressing. So when you put a student in control of their own learning, of course you're going to get new behaviors emerging. And we need to understand these behaviors in order to give effective feedback and guidance, as I've said. So when we think about behaviors, we generally think about them in terms of being positive or negative. They're going to have a positive influence on student outcomes, or they're going to have a negative influence. And some of them are very easy to classify. So a student engaging in revision or practice, we generally see as being a positive thing. Negative would be something like not completing all concepts in the curriculum. Another negative is falling behind the class, or positive would be working ahead. But what about these two behaviors? They're a little bit more complex, and there are things that can definitely happen, as we will see in adaptive learning. Well, a student can complete all the concepts 3 weeks early, or a very good student could start quite late in the course. Are these positive or negative things? Are these things that we should be worried about, telling the student to avoid, or actively encouraging students to engage in? We don't know. It very much depends on the student, it depends on the course, it depends on how the course is assessed. It depends on a lot of things. It's very difficult to classify these more complex behaviors. In the examples that we're going to see, what I want to kind of define, and in the research that we're doing, in the kind of broader research that we're doing in this area, I want to define what we actually mean by behavior. So by behavior, I mean how students engage with their learning, or how they act in response to feedback and guidance. How we actually, actually do that in reality is we look at the various metrics that Realizeit gathers, and there are many, and we look at how they change over time to see if behaviors can emerge. What is the long-term behavior across the whole course for each individual student? We don't look at instantaneous changes in behavior, but it's more of these kind of long-term behaviors. So we're going to look at how various metrics change over time. So getting on to the examples of this. As I said, the examples come from real students in courses in UCF. We're going to be looking at two metrics out of all of the ones we could possibly look at. These are progress, which is the cumulative number of concepts that a student has completed, and we're going to look at effort, which is the cumulative number of activities that they've started. Now this is just that they've started, they've not necessarily been successful in these activities, or they didn't necessarily complete them, but they at least started them. So that's going to be our measure for effort, and we have how far through the course they've gotten as our measure of progress. Again, we're not looking at what ability level they're at, what their standard of their knowledge is, and just how much of it they've done. The system, of course, will only let a student progress if they have a high enough ability value, so it's kind of taken care of by this metric as well. We're looking at cumulative metrics because they're easier to look at over time. Like the kind of instantaneous metrics that change day by day are quite complicated and hard to look at. So that's why we're looking at these cumulative ones. So there are 3 examples we're going to go through. The first one is in psychology. We have 1 semester of data, and it has about 173 students in it. We're going to look at a nursing course called Pathophysiology. Here we're going to look at multiple semesters. We have about just over 500 students. We have a mixture of students who took Pathophysiology in the summer, where the semester is 12 weeks long, and other students who took it in the spring and fall, where it's 15 weeks long. The last example we're going to look at is actually 2 courses, 2 algebra courses. We have intermediate algebra with about 300 students, and college algebra with just over 90 students. This is an interesting example to look at. Intermediate algebra leads on to college algebra, but the instructor actually set them up to both run in a single semester, and we had 13 students who actually took both of them, who were common across the 2 courses. So we're going to see what happened to those guys as well. So let me jump across here. To observe these behaviors emerging, I animated the data so we can replay it over time. So this is going to be like a time lapse. We're going to click play, and we're going to see students engaging in the learning, making progress, and putting in different effort levels. We have effort here across the bottom. This is, again, the number of activities that students have done. And we have progress going up the y-axis. This is how much of the course that they've done. Hopefully you can see them. We have these horizontal lines representing 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100% of the course complete. I've represented each student by a little dot down. You can see it's day 0, so nobody's done anything yet, no progress, no effort, everybody's down here at 0, 0. And I'm going to click play, and we're going to see the days tick past, and we're going to see how much cumulative effort students have put in and how much progress they've made through the course. So let me click play. So we can see students immediately shooting out of the blocks, and we have some students racing on ahead. And in less than 20 days, we already have students finish this psychology course. We have the rest of the students still down around the 25% mark, making kind of steady progress. You can see they're much more grouped together. But we do see a spread start to come in terms of the amount of effort that they're putting in. They're starting to spread out in the X direction. Coming up to over halfway through the course now, and you can see you have quite a range of different progress levels and a range of different effort levels. As we get towards the end of the course, you'll see a rush of students putting in lots of effort in order to get finished, and there they all go when they're finished. I should have said up front that this course, all the content, the entire course was made available to students at day 1, and they could go as fast or as slow through it as they wanted. We can see that most students are here at the top line. That shows us that most students, the vast majority of them, actually successfully completed all the concepts and all the nodes in this course. We do have a few students who got around the 75% mark, and unfortunately we do have a couple of students who never really got out of the starting blocks and stuck down here with only a couple of the nodes and concepts complete. I'm going to turn on the paths now to show the different paths that students took to get to their success levels. We can see that the students put in quite a range of different efforts. We have one student up here who did about 1,200 learning activities, but most students down in the maybe 50 to 250 range, again, quite a spread. And you can see all the different pathways the students took in terms of the amount of effort they put in and the progress they've made. And that really shows, I think, the strength of one of the strengths of adaptive learning. You can show that there are many different pathways for the students to take in order to get to success, that top line. In order to get a bit more insight into the different behaviors going on here, I took each of the metrics, effort and progress, and plotted them over time, so we can see how they're changing over time. The top graph here is progress, and the bottom graph here is effort. So focusing in on the progress one, we will focus on the progress one in these examples. Progress is a little easier to look at because there's a cap on it. Students can only complete 100% of the course, they can't do any more. There's no cap on the effort levels, so it's a little harder to pick out behaviors there. That's part of the ongoing researches into how to understand and how to analyze that kind of data. So focusing in on the progress, we see this dark band going up the main diagonal here. This is the main pathway taking and the main trajectory followed by the most of the students. They come in every couple of days, or they come in once every 1 or 2 weeks and complete an objective and make kind of steady, consistent progress up along until they completed the course. They complete the course right at the end of the time. All these lines above that kind of main diagonal, these are students who moved ahead of the rest of the group and worked ahead in the class. Lines below represent students who were working behind the rest of the group. To help kind of see some of these behaviors, we actually identified 4 prototype students. We picked out 4 students to kind of show the range of behaviors that you can see in here, and we gave them little animals to represent them. So we have our hare, this is our first one. We can see he shoots out of the blocks. He completes the entire course in a very short period of time. He finishes up, this particular student finished up in 17 days, and we can see from his effort line down here that once he was finished the course, he did nothing else. He didn't come back in to do any revision or practice or anything like that, got all the concepts completed, and then left our system. That's not to say he didn't do some revision and practice outside of the system, but he just didn't do anything else within our system. We then have the tortoise. So this is an example of the kind of behavior we generally we have traditionally tried to get students to go towards. This is the student who logs in every couple of days and does a little bit of work, and they make slow, steady progress the whole way throughout the course from start to finish. Very like the tortoise, but slightly different, we have the frog, and most students seem to be somewhat like the frog. These are the students who log in once every 1 or 2 weeks and complete an objective amount of work. They complete what's due at that particular time. And they do make steady progress, but they do it in little hops. And the last student, I think, is one of the most interesting guys, and it's a student that I don't think could exist in a system or could exist anywhere else but in adaptive learning. This is the student who, he actually did nothing for 80 days. We can see him on this red line here. It was over 80 days before he did anything, and he completed a small number of the concepts. He then went dormant again for a while, and then completed the remainder of the concepts in a very short period of time, right at the very end of the course. I think it's kind of high-risk behavior, really left everything to the last minute. But what's interesting about this student is that they did get everything done. And not only did they get everything done, we can see by their effort bar here at the bottom, their effort line. You see the way it jumps. We can also see it by the fact the student is out here on the right-hand side in this graph. They actually put in more effort than the other students, at least when we measure it by number of learning activities. So that kind of promotes a couple of different questions. How do we classify some of these behaviors as being, or can we classify some of these behaviors as being good or bad, and by good or positive or negative? And by that I mean they have a positive influence on student outcomes or a negative influence. Or is there any influence at all? Does it matter the pathway that the students take? Will they all end up ultimately benefiting the same amount? We can think of this, we generally would think of this kangaroo as being a negative kind of behavior, but like I said, not only did he get everything done, he put in more effort than everybody else. He did it to a very high standard. His knowledge state was 90. Also, the hare, it might initially appear to be a positive behavior working ahead of the group, but given he was dormant then for so long, it could end up being having a negative impact on his actual outcomes. And you can see he as well has quite a high standard, up around 96. It's also interesting to look at these behaviors and think about them in terms of efficiency and how efficient students are being in their learning. While we have the hare who got everything done very quickly, he took, if I get it right, he took, I think, about I think it was actually a little more than that, maybe 15 days he was active. So out of the 17 days, he was active for 15. Whereas our frog, who, I highlight the right guy, there we go, he took much longer to complete. He took the entire length of the course to complete all the activities, but he was only active on 8 days, one for each of the 8 objectives. So it's interesting to think about these students and think about who made the most efficient use of their time. Find the hare finished up quickly and could move on to other stuff, but they ultimately have a negative effect. The frog broke his work up more and did it in small stages. Granted, it took the entire length of the course to do it, but actually only had to commit 8 days in order to get it all done. So moving on then to the second example is pathophysiology. So this is a nursing course, and as I said before, this is a group of students. We have kind of 2 different groups of students here. We have students who did the course over 12 weeks in the summer, and we have students who did it in the spring and fall over 15 weeks. So let me click play on this to see what happens. What's interesting here is that we don't see the kind of explosion of different pathways and behaviors that we do in psychology. The students remain much kind of tighter grouped together. We are getting a spread out in terms of the amount of effort that they're putting in, but in terms of the rate of progress, they stay very, very kind of clustered together. If I turn on the pathways, that becomes really evident. You can see up here on the pathway, on the progress graph, you can see students staying very, very clustered together. You don't have students racing ahead. That's down to how the course was managed. That option wasn't available to students. The material was only made available to them on a rolling basis, so you couldn't get students racing ahead. But interestingly, you don't have students really falling behind. The instructor is very involved with the students and is very hands-on, and you don't get many students falling behind. We do see what I call flatlining happening, which is students making a certain amount of progress and then not making any more. They're not like the psychology students who generally come back to life at the end and have that rush of effort in order to get finished. They tend to, the students who go flatline tend to stay pretty flatline. There's not that many of them though. The fact that we have so many semesters put together here make it look like there's more than there is. We'll see that in a minute. What's interesting in this case to look at is to look at the path, kind of the median path followed by the students, to summarize the differences between the 12-week terms and the 15-week terms. So if I turn on the path for spring and fall, what we have plotted is the median path followed. So the pathway followed by the median student you can think of. We can see that for the 2 15-week semesters, we have very similar pathways followed, not a huge difference between them. If I turn on the summer pathway, we can see there is a separation. What's interesting to note is that you can see this yellow line, which represents the summer term. We can see it's very similar to the other 2 terms, the students from the other 2 terms. For about the first half of the course, they follow the same trajectory, learning at the same rate then, and they make the same amount of progress in the same amount of time for about the first half of the course, so learning at the same rate as the other 2 groups. The difference really emerges over the second half of the course. These students have to follow a much sharper trajectory through the remaining material in order to get complete than the other 2 groups of students. who can, because they have an extra couple of weeks or 3 weeks, it can follow a much shallower, more gentle path through. What will be interesting to do is to follow up with these students to see if there's any kind of impact of these kind of steeper trajectory on students' knowledge, on their outcomes from assessments, and their retention of knowledge. The last example we are going to look at is looking at the algebra courses. In this case, we've got 2 courses. We have intermediate algebra and college algebra, and these are run in the same semester, but we do have students who were common to both. In UCF, some students have to take college algebra in order to earn a math credit. If they're not able for college algebra, they have to do intermediate algebra first, but that does not give them a math credit. They have to do intermediate algebra first and then go on to do college algebra in the following semester. The instructor took a kind of an innovative approach here and ran both at the same time. Any student who, and ran both of them in the system, I should say, at the same time, any student who made sufficient progress through the intermediate algebra material could then switch over to college algebra and attempt to earn their math credit in the same semester. And we had 13 students who did that. So I'm going to highlight those 13 students and click play. And we'll see the students, the intermediate algebra and the college algebra students starting off. And we can see our common students highlighted in blue. We can see they're generally ahead of the rest of the intermediate algebra, making quick and steady progress through the intermediate algebra material. And by less than halfway through the course, they're already finished. And now we're going to see them starting off in college algebra. And what's interesting about these students is the rate at which they move. Not only do they catch up to the rest of the college algebra group, in many cases they pass students by. And by this stage, if you didn't know that they had done intermediate algebra, you wouldn't be able to really tell the difference between them. Actually, one of these intermediate algebra, or one of these students who came from intermediate algebra, was actually the 3rd fastest to finish college algebra. Got all of the intermediate algebra and all of college algebra done quicker than most people did just college algebra. So they obviously really benefited from doing the intermediate algebra stuff first. We can see this student way out here on the right actually did more activities in college algebra than anybody else. So did all of the intermediate algebra and then did more in college algebra than anybody else. I think this is a really good example of the kind of thing that adaptive learning can enable. And you put the students in control, give them the chance to make progress, to set their own pace, and this is a very good example of what can happen. We can see all the students following a very steep, quick path through the material in intermediate algebra, then coming into college algebra and catching up, and in many cases bypassing the rest of the class. Unfortunately, we did have one of the students who didn't make it very far in college algebra, but for the remaining 12, it was an absolute success. And it would make me wonder how many of the other students in college algebra could have benefited from doing the intermediate algebra course first, and how many more of the intermediate algebra students could potentially have gone on to do quite well in college algebra if they had taken the chance to jump across. So a very good example of what can happen when you take full advantage of adaptive learning. So let me jump back to the slides now. To highlight the range of different behaviors that can emerge and the differences between the courses, what I've done here is I've taken the progress charts that we've seen previously and plotted them for each of the courses and for each semester in each of the courses. So we have the pathophysiology students here in the kind of orange color. We can see how tightly grouped they stay together. You don't get the kind of big explosion of behaviors. And like I said, that's down to how the instructor manages the course. The instructor in this case puts a lot of effort into making the lessons adaptive rather than allowing students to take many different pathways through the material. The focus is on getting adaptivity in at the lesson and using case studies and things like that. As I said, we don't see many students flatlining, just a couple per class. On the bottom here then we see psychology. We have psychology in spring, which is the one we looked at, and we have psychology in the fall, following fall semester. Here we can see a much wider range of activities, you know, a huge explosion of different pathways in the spring semester, less in the fall semester. And I believe that's got to do with a change they made to the structure of the course. They went from having the material and all the concepts split into 8 objectives, and I think they went to maybe 12 or 15 objectives in the fall semester. And we can see that that has had the impact of concentrating students along a more kind of steady path. We get less students racing ahead and less falling behind or working behind as well. And we'll come back to look at that again in a second. Up here at the top 10 we have the college algebra, and again it's more like maybe the pathophysiology courses. We have the college algebra in blue. You don't get students racing ahead. Unfortunately, you do get students falling behind. We do see students flatlining, and we also see students who continually work throughout but don't make the kind of you know, do end up dropping off in terms of the amount of progress that they make, but they are working kind of consistently. They're just not getting through everything. I want to highlight here as well, this is intermediate algebra in the purple. Here's our group of students who started off and followed a very quick, sharp trajectory to get all of intermediate algebra finished. Then they started in college algebra about halfway through the course and followed a very sharp trajectory to catch up and even bypass some of the other students. There is something a little more subtle going on here in the college algebra that I want to highlight as well. And to do that, I've taken these curves, and what I actually have done is I've computed the interquartile range. So I've computed where the middle 50% of students are. So the 50% of the students are in the shaded regions now for each of these courses. So this gives us an idea of how spread out the class is getting, and it can highlight if we have a huge range of different behaviors or if the class stays very clustered together. So we have our pathophysiology courses, and we've seen that before, and this highlights even further. These guys stay very, very clustered together, very grouped together. 50% of the students are in the, like I said, these shaded regions. Excuse me. We have psychology. We can see a bit more of a spreading out of the students in here in the middle, but everybody pretty much is finished together. We can see these two curves come very close to each other at the end, showing that, you know, most people actually achieve 100% or very, very close to it. As I said, we see less of a kind of a splitting out and an explosion of behaviors in the second semester of psychology, and we can see that by the narrower band. But moving up here then to the college algebra, we can see that in the first semester that band got wider and wider and wider as students progressed, and it was quite wide right here at the end. We had some of the top students in the interquartile range up here around 80%, and some other students down here below maybe 40, maybe down around 35% here. And what you'll notice happening as the instructor put more and more effort into the course and, you know, improved the course and pushed things on, you can see the band actually getting narrower over time. So all of the students, or some of the students, got kind of pulled together, and we see less of a divergence in terms of behaviors. And we also see that now this band of students actually finishes much higher up. So we see the results of the improvements to the course. We see the students becoming more clustered together, and their scores and their progress actually improve here in the latest semester that we have data for. So what's next for this research? Well, we have a research plan in place. We have a number of steps that we're working through, and this is kind of an iterative cycle that we'll be going through. We have this mechanical phase that we're involved in at the minute. This is looking at the metrics that the system has, looking at the various techniques that we can use to automatically analyze and identify some of these behaviors. and then looking at the range of behaviors that can happen in the system in all the different contexts, in long courses that are 15 weeks long, or in other institutions where they have much shorter terms, and getting a handle on what are the range of behaviors that we can identify, not just in the 2 metrics that we've seen here, but in all of the, in a much wider range of metrics and different types of metrics as well. After we get a good handle on that, I say we're currently here, we're in iteration 0.1 because we really are just at the start of this project. After we get a handle on that, we'll move to the more kind of understanding phase. And this is where this research should start to impact on the system. So there are a couple of things that we'll need to understand. We will need to understand the relationships between the behaviors that we're going to identify and already have identified, and the outcomes that the students get, and the assessments and the retention of knowledge and various things like that. Once we understand that, then we can begin to classify behaviors and begin to talk about them in terms of whether they're positive or negative or indeed neutral, talk about them in terms of efficiencies. We want to understand also, what's the consistency of these behaviors? Are they consistent across time? Is it something that you are learning, this is somehow how you just go about learning? If you are a kangaroo, you are always a kangaroo, or you learn this particular way when you're doing mathematics and this particular way when you're doing some other subject. So what's the consistency across these? And do we see certain behaviors emerging in certain disciplines that we never see in other disciplines? And how the structure of a course can impact on the behaviors that we see. We've already seen that it can in some of the examples we've looked at. Finally, we want to look at what's influencing these behaviors, what's driving them. Is it, again, something to do with who you are? That's just the way you go about learning. Or is it kind of personal or social things going on at the time that are driving you to behave in a particular way? Or, and is there, across all of this, we're of course going to be keeping in mind, are we observing causations or are we just merely observing correlations? Is there something else that we're missing that is actually driving all these and driving these relationships and driving the behaviors that we're observing? Once we get a handle on some of that stuff, then we can look at how we can impact the system. Some of the stuff actually we can bring into the system very, very quickly. For example, once we finish this kind of mechanical stage of being able to take some of the metrics and automatically identify behaviors and say that, and observe that we've seen these particular students engaging in these different behaviors, we can start to fill in that into our learner profile. And that's extra information then available to the system and available to the learner, instructor, and whoever else. And it tells us something extra about the system, or about the learner. The system algorithms and processes that are already in place can then start to make use of that information, and that can actually help us with the understanding phase and talking about these behaviors in terms of whether them being positive or negative, and whether it's something we should be encouraging the student to do or staying away from. They can have an impact on several of the models that we have in the system, particularly those that do provide feedback and guidance to the student. If we know that a student is engaging in a particular behavior, and we can identify it at an early enough stage, and we know it to be negative, it's something we can suggest to the student to move away from. On a kind of related point, it can have a big impact on the early warning system that we're developing. So this is another piece of ongoing research. We're looking at how early can we identify students who could potentially be at risk. If we think back to the kangaroo who left everything to the last minute, any early warning system that's out there or people have developed, that kangaroo would be setting off alarm bells. They should be leaving it 80 days and then even longer before they engaged again, before they actually really got stuck into the course, should be setting off a lot of alarm bells. If we know that these kind of behaviors exist, then we can take it into account in the early warning system and know that for this particular student, maybe this is not a bad thing and we don't need to sound the alarm. We can also take it into account in building social and group learning situations. It's another area that we're hoping to look into developing in the future. maybe there are certain behaviors that don't mix well. Maybe rabbits and kangaroos don't get on, but frogs can work with anybody. So we can use that kind of information to create effective learning groups. So to kind of sum up, well, I just wanted to share with you today some of the different behaviors that we've already observed. As I said, this is an ongoing project. As we learn more, I hope to share more and more with you on what we've done, and hopefully we'll start to see some of the impact of what we've done in the system in the near future. And I'd like to say thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Happy St. Patrick's Day for tomorrow, and I'm happy to take any questions from any of you.
Thank you, Colm. That was fantastic. And we do have a couple of questions queued up for you. First up, in the courses that you presented and discussed today, were they online or were they blended or hybrid? How does that divvy out?
So they were a mixture. The psychology course and the algebra course were online. In the pathophysiology is where you have the mix. Some were online and some were blended. It will be interesting to look at what are the differences in behaviors we see in those courses, actually.
Okay, and then I know you mentioned that this is part of an ongoing process and you're continually evaluating results, but we did have the question asked if you had any preliminary studies looking at the different personas in the short term versus long-term memory transfer and retention.
No, like I said, this is really early days yet. We haven't really got beyond trying to identify what behaviors are there. I see us probably because we've done some work on these courses, we will probably end up doing that kind of, looking at that kind of thing for these courses in the short term, and then that will help inform us for how to go forward in a broader project.
Great. And are these displays and models available now as part of the Realizeit product?
They aren't available this minute. We are building them in. I don't know when they will be available. We are currently building them into the system. They are the data that is driven these particular animations and visualizations is available in the system. I actually just use the extracts that come out of the system to do it. So if somebody's looking to get their hands on the data, we can do that for them, and they should be able to generate and extract these visualizations in the near future, but I don't know dates.
Got it. You somewhat answered the next question, but we did have a question, since it wasn't the Realizeit system that generated that, what software did you use to make the animations?
So I used a JavaScript package called D3. Those animations are actually just a web page. So D3 is kind of difficult. I'm not very good at it myself. It's a JavaScript library. You need to know how to program in order to use it. But there should be other packages available that can do a very similar thing.
Okay, great. That's actually all of the questions I had queued up at the moment. I will go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you so much, Colm, for presenting today, and thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Feel free to reach out to us, either Colm directly or through our website, realizeitlearning.com. We're happy to discuss this further, answer any additional questions, and again, we will be sharing the recording today with everyone. Again, we really appreciate you taking your time today to join us, and we look forward to presenting more in the future. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Leah.